To kind of bolster my point a little bit, let's see if my button actually works this time. Pandemics result from destruction of nature, says UN and WHO. Experts call for legislation and trade deals worldwide to encourage green recovery. Well, wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be nice if we could actually encourage green recovery? Pandemics such as coronavirus are the result of humanity's destruction of nature, according to leaders at the UN, WHO, WWF International, and the world has been ignoring this stark reality for decades. So why are we continuing to do it? Why not stop? Today might be a good day. The illegal and unsustainable wildlife trade has as well as the devastation of forests and other wild places were still the driving forces behind the increasing number of diseases leaping from wildlife to humans, the leaders told The Guardian. They are calling for a green and healthy recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, in particular by reforming destructive farming and unsustainable diets. Well, there you have it. They have the answer. I don't know if that's actually the answer, and those all just sound very good words, right? These are very, very, very fine words that they're speaking out into the air for people to, listen to and then forget immediately. Anyways, that's just something I wanted to kind of put out there. That I too believe that climate change is going to exacerbate the mutation of viruses, bacteria, etc., and is going to disable our ability to respond, our own immune system to respond accordingly. Right, exactly. So, if this coronavirus, if you think that you're immune to this coronavirus and it mutates, well, maybe you're not. Maybe you're not. Anyways, maybe it's disease and viruses that take out the human race, quicker than anything else. Other, new news from the day, Arctic Ocean acidification could reach levels far greater than predicted if emissions stay high. Well, I mean, this is kind of a dumb headline because, yes, if emissions stay high, they could reach levels far greater than predicted. So, really? Did you have to? I mean, I think that's pretty much self-explanatory there. Yes, if we keep on destroying the earth and keep on pumping out CO2, are we going to screw up the environment even more than predicted? Well, yes, that would happen. The Arctic Ocean could absorb 20% more carbon than previously predicted before the end of the century, according to a recent study. It's a jump that could result in even more acidification, jeopardizing marine wildlife. About 7.5 billion tons of carbon was projected to be absorbed by the Arctic Ocean in previous estimates, says Jens Terhar, the lead author of the research paper released this month in the journal Nature. The new study, a joint undertaking between the University of Bern and Switzerland and École Normale Supérieure in Paris, found that this number is actually 1.5 billion tons higher, under what's commonly known as the business as usual, or RCP 8.5 high emission scenario. Wow. Reaching 9 billion tons of carbon absorbed by 2100. Wow. So the worst case scenarios are actually worse than the worst case scenarios. Golly gee willikers. While the Arctic Ocean represents 1% of the global seawater, it's by far the most vulnerable to a changing climate. Tahar said that's mainly just because it's very cold and colder water holds more carbon. So, if you didn't know, now you know. Continue to like up the video, guys, if you can. And if you are new to the channel, please remember to subscribe. Got a good amount of folks watching now. Moving on. Locusts are putting 5 million people at risk of starvation, and that's without COVID-19. The locust problem continues to grow and to spread. The most serious desert locust outbreak in 70 years could leave nearly 5 million people in East Africa facing starvation, according to the International Rescue Committee. It comes as many of the countries in the region are already struggling to manage food insecurity caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. As you can see, it's also in Yemen, where there is already a famine underway due to a civil war. And obviously, this is not going to help that situation. So all over East Africa, Yemen, into Pakistan, Iran, and parts of India. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations has already warned that the pandemic has left some of the world's most vulnerable communities facing a crisis within a crisis as it disrupts supply chains and hammers the economy, exacerbating the global hunger problem. Now locusts are destroying crops that could have been a lifeline. A square kilometer swarm can consume the same amount of food in one day as 35,000 people. Kenya, Uganda, South Sudan, Ethiopia, Somalia, Eritrea, Djibouti, and Sudan are among the worst hit countries, and the outbreak threatens to spread wider, the IRC says. Again, we've been watching that story over the last few weeks, and it just continues. This from Chris Van Steenbergen on Twitter. Chris Van Steenbergen is saying that the possibility of a BOE or Blue Ocean event this year is likely. He's saying, even too scary for me and absolutely worrisome for humanity. I put a possible Blue Ocean event on the 15th of August and a sea ice-free Arctic on the 21st of September. I guess he's just pointing to how thin the Arctic ice already is, and it's June 30th, and we have about 2.5 months of more sea ice melt to go, and we have incredibly high temperatures all over the Arctic, and they don't seem to be waning or going away. So there you go. Let's add that to the list of wonderful things that could possibly happen this year. And by wonderful, I mean terrible. Cougar W says no BOE this year. I mean, right now it's a betting game. Literally is a betting game. Place your bets, because it could be this year, it could be next year, it could be the next year. So, some say yes, some say no. I don't know, Cougar W, if you feel like that's a definitive no Blue Ocean event. I don't know. I would say that, it's a wait and see. It's a wait and see game. With the high temperature anomalies happening in the Arctic day after day after day after day, those kind of high temperature anomalies are obviously going to take a toll. Are they going to clear the Arctic of ice? Who knows? I don't know. Obviously, when it does happen, is going to happen, and it's going to happen. That's not going to be good. All right, guys, let's get into this Jem Bendell article, which is super duper long. It's like a small novel. I don't think I'm going to read all of it, but I'm going to try to read deep into it, because I think the message he's trying to get across is a worthy one. So this is from Professor Jem Bendell. 2 days ago, the collapse of ideology and the end of escape. So let's get into this. If you have begun to anticipate the climate-driven collapse of societies, what can you wish for? I have written elsewhere about the problems of being attached to hope. If that means we falsely assume we can't engage in the world creatively unless we have an expectation of a lasting positive outcome. But it can still be useful to reflect on what we actually wish for, given our assessments of what we think is inevitable, likely, or possible in the near future. When asked by Vicky Robin recently what might possibly go right, I took some time to reflect on what might be a realistic wish of mine, one that I could honestly believe rather than desire or believe in order to feel a bit better or to please an audience, which could be colleagues or the wider public. I found that what I wish for is a collapse of the ideology which has caused so much destruction and suffering, and which will continue to do so as our ecosystems, economies, and societies break down. I wish for that ideology to collapse as soon as possible, because the longer it lasts, the more destruction will occur, and the less able we will be able to reduce harm, experience joy, and find meaning as societies break down. So what is this ideology that I blame for our predicament and wish would collapse as soon as possible? Why is it so bad? Why did it proliferate? And therefore, what could bring it crashing down? How can we live creatively and meaningfully by consciously freeing ourselves and each other from that ideology? There are questions I will attempt to answer in this essay. I will not be sharing anything particularly new when describing specific elements of this ideology, but I group those elements in a new way for ease of recollection and discussion. I call this ideology of ESCAPE, escape, which compromises our assumptions of or beliefs in the following: entitlement, surety, which is another word for certainty, control, autonomy, progress, and exceptionalism. There is a lot of sociology, psychology, and philosophy on each of these elements, which I may cover in my future writing, but in this essay, my aim is to offer a simple synthesis to share with anyone I work with and people interested in the deeper implications of anticipating climate-driven societal collapse. My ideas draw upon, combine, and adapt ideas from many different schools of thought, such as French existentialism, German critical theory, Buddhism, and mysticism. I do not reference that scholarship in this essay because few of the authors I have read say exactly what I am saying, so I would need to provide nuance and further details. The result is a dry read, particularly because I will not be giving examples of people and organizations that are doing things wrong and perpetuating the ideology of escape. My reason for that is I do not want to suggest in this ideology that this ideology is outside of us or that the fault is with others. Instead, this ideology is within all of us, including myself, and is shaping how I approach my life, even as I type these words. This is why I will give some examples of the elements of escape ideology shaping my own life. By doing so, I hope it may help you to spot when you are experiencing thoughts, emotions, and patterns that are holding you and all of us back. However, I am also aware that much of what follows will read like gobbledygook to many people. In my experience, these ideas can only be understood properly through facilitated experiences and dialogue, rather than reading about them. Nevertheless, I hope this long read of 11,000 words will provide some material for reflection alongside any practices you are engaged in for your own inner awareness. The use of the acronym ESCAPE is intentional and convenient, as it alludes to the way this ideology has been motivated by a desire to escape from unavoidable aspects of our reality, impermanence and death. This is so right on. And on the one hand, that's on the one hand, and our built-in aversion to those realities on the other, which arises because we are life forms with the ability to reflect on our existence as a separate mortal entity. The ideas in this essay The ideas in this essay are not essential for people to understand and engage in their own deep adaptation to our climate tragedy, but are my contribution to the inevitable discussion of why we've got ourselves into this disaster and how we can help each other avoid making matters worse as we respond to it. Could this ideology be the driving force behind our speciesism or our humanism or our human supremacy? I think so. Entitlement in escape ideology. There is a widespread assumption that we are entitled not to feel emotional pain and suffering, that we are entitled to have our inner worlds heard and validated, that we are entitled to have more than our basic needs met. I certainly would like those things, but am I entitled to them? When so many people in the world are suffering, when injury, pain, loss, and death are as much a part of life as their opposites, why should I assume my needs, whether material or for self-expression, are always a priority? Ooh, these are great questions. A sense of entitlement can enable people to express their views and needs to others and the world, which might be okay if it wasn't for the fact that the sense of entitlement is socially conditioned and is therefore more prevalent amongst the white, male, and rich of our species. That means we hear so much more from such people like me. Yes, one reason I thought I could write this essay and expect it to arrive in front of your face is because of the sense of entitlement produced in me by my culture. And with that awareness, I did it anyways, so I will return to that sticky issue below. People sometimes ask, but why is entitlement a problem? First, because it is unevenly distributed according to social conditioning, which aligns with inequalities in society, so therefore is a mechanism of the interpersonal reproduction of systems of inequality. For example, women don't just need to lean in, us men need to lean the heck back. By reinforcing power differentials, the cultural contributions of the masculine, the rich, the white, the confident define what is considered normal, and the current normal is the most heinous destruction of life on Earth. So that's a bit of a problem, wouldn't you agree? Oh, the paradox of continuing writing here. But I want to explain that there is a second issue, which means that democratizing of entitlements is not the answer. Ooh, ding, ding, ding. The expectation that we should have positive emotional experiences and that our emotional difficulties will be resolved means that we can expect external support for our inner emotional worlds. It is wonderful when such support is available and when we are able to offer that to each other. However, the expectation and sense that we are entitled to not feel bad is problematic because it creates insatiable appetites for new experiences and the pursuit of manic distractions. Exactly. There can be no achievement of lasting happiness by pursuing it. The sense that we are entitled to happiness means we contribute to the destruction of the planet through constant consumption, and we instinctively feel that it is justified to push away information that we might feel bad about, such as information on our complicity in the oppression of others or the destruction of life on Earth. Noticing the problematic assumption and belief in entitlement does not mean we don't want to try to meet our own and others' needs. Instead, being aware of this ideological assumption means that we begin to question our own sense of entitlement. We can loosen our expectation that what we feel or think is a priority for others to know or address. So that's a bit of a conundrum, right? Because everybody wants to be seen and heard or acknowledged, etc., but maybe that's not always possible or even right. On some levels. Although the sense of entitlement, questioning entitlement does not go against the belief in human rights or an openness in human relating, but brings attention to uneven expectations of participation, audience, and power. Yes. Although the sense of entitlement of people who are white, male, and rich has been increasingly challenged since the 60s, the assumption of entitlement per se is not. It may mean people don't stay open to painful situations that unfold as our societies are disrupted. I learned about my own sense of entitlement to not feel pain about other people's experience of emotional pain when I attended a breathwork session. It involves people lying down and hyperventilating to achieve an altered state of consciousness. That might sound odd, but for me, when well facilitated, it helps me connect with loving consciousness and have new insights. In previous sessions, I had often become distracted and somewhat annoyed when people lying in the room next to me would start wailing and screaming as they expressed emotional pain, sometimes within minutes of the start. A wise friend suggested I might, in general, be averse to my own emotional difficulty at other people's emotional pain. It came to mind in one breathwork session when two women started to cry very close to me. I noticed my annoyance and then invited a more loving response in me. I sat up and cross-legged silently witnessed their crying and pain. I accepted it was how they were feeling right now for whatever reason, and without judgment, I witnessed their emotion and began to cry with them. Achieving equanimity would be wonderful, but we are entitled to prioritize that at this time. Are we entitled to prioritize that at this time? It is a difficult question. I believe it is important to seek equanimity for many reasons, but prioritizing it at a time of turmoil might in some cases be an entitled response to our predicament. One statement I particularly liked from Mohandas Gandhi was when he explained that while he knew he had a lot more inner work to do, he could do on himself, he felt that his inner world was less important than the pressing matters of India's liberation and non-violence between its peoples. He did not mean that spiritual inquiry and heart-opening practices were not important, but while such work is never complete, we live in this world and have other matters to attend to. Right. All you spiritual manifestors out there, all you just, living in love and loving the world people out there, it's all going to be fine. Not just because you say so. Anyways, I'll stop interjecting so much. Surety and escape ideology. I will use the word surety to describe the threefold assumption that we can be certain of reality, that it is good to be certain, and that there is a universal standard through which we can all agree what is reality and how to know it. One way this assumption manifests is in relation to the idea of rationality, which posits that we can be certain of reality by using rational intellect, and secondly, that more use of rational intellect and the artifacts it creates, such as computer models, are always positive in the pursuit of knowledge. The third aspect of this is the idea that knowledge claims are better because they relate to an imagined notion of objectivity, which is universal by virtue of not being influenced by subjective bias. These are all lies debunked by critics of logical positivism and scientific empiricism over many decades. At first, the new power of institutions that promoted rational scientific method were widely welcomed as they provided opposition to religion and superstition. Today, this approach persists in most cultures, which means people and organizations privilege measurement over depth of understanding. It persists because it is convenient for the power of some, particularly because it requires significant resources to produce the knowledge that will be considered valid in fields like medicine, economy, engineering, planning, and such like. However, no one matter, rationality, and religion are not so dissimilar. Let me read that again. However, on one matter, rationality and religion are not so dissimilar because institutionalized religion typically involves its own repressive surety. It suggests we can make concrete with human concept and language the nature of reality that is universal and transcendent. Any invitation to adhere to simple stories of reality, whether with a religious, nationalist, or political flavor, is an invitation away from staying fully present to experiences, complexity, ambiguity, and unknowability. With spirituality, sadly, religions can the inevitable. The cross-cutting theme for all of these delusions of surety is that they arise from an attachment to stable forms and an aversion to fluidity. A key part of the ideology of surety is that we assume that because a word describes a concept which describes a reality, that the word is somehow true about a reality rather than being a contingent, fallible, and provisional tool for helping us communicate about things whose real nature we don't fully comprehend through language. The formulas of science and creeds of religion are all too easily used as escapes from the ambiguity of infinitely complex existence that is only revealed to us through our limited senses, limited capabilities of cognition, and limited modes of conceptualization and communication with language. How you guys doing? Is this are you all enjoying this, or is this going way off in the weeds for you? Anyways, I'm going to go back to this and keep reading. F the ineffable, right? I'm going to go back to reading this, and hopefully you guys are still... Yeah, this is heavy reading, probably something to read on your own. I'm not going to make it all the way through this, but if you guys want to read this, it's easily found. You can continue reading after the show, but I'm going to keep going. This desire for surety has led humanity to fixate on our stories of reality and add new information into those stories, rather than staying curious about realities. It has encouraged us to look for sensory information that affirm our stories of reality and ignore sensory information which doesn't affirm those stories. Because of that, we pay more attention to our stories of good and bad than what might be happening around us and how we might be feeling if we didn't let those stories shape or deny those feelings. In the world of rational thinking, we see this emphasis on surety manifest in a focus on what can be considered credible knowledge claims according to established norms, above attentiveness to what might be happening in the world. This is a very excellent point here. It is not an accident that we invest more on measuring and modeling environmental destruction than stopping it. Right. It is why we have more intellectual texts on the precautionary principle than policies that enforce it. Boom. It is why there are more people praying to God than giving to charity or taking risks for social justice and environmental protection, despite the destructive times we live within. In each case, the rehearsals of personal identity and concern can override our ability to remain radically present to all that is. Fear often makes people cling more tenaciously to their particular worldview and less present to what is actually happening. They might waste huge amounts of time, effort, and money to concoct new confirmations of their stories of reality. That could be scientists doubling down on their preferred methodologies in order to distract themselves from what's happening outside their window, or people turning to nationalism when realizing their past story of the future no longer feels valid, or economists doubling down on theories and associated policies which clearly don't work. But it even happens when people reify the stories that might appear to be in contrast to escape ideology, as their believers claim that if only we believe in them more, then they will come true. When I was completing my PhD in 2002, I became most acutely aware of the problem of aspiring to surety. I had developed a framework of concepts that I thought had helped explain the moral or ethical use of influence. For my final chapter, I decided to explore all the potential limitations of my framework, and suddenly the whole edifice came crashing down. After 4 years of work, that realization was a bit stressful, and I wrote a new ending about the inability to describe love and action through concepts, because context and intention is always important. My friend read it and told me I was stumbling into basic Buddhist philosophy. With that in mind, I wonder what I am going to do with this essay. My desire to systemize systematize my sense of the ideology of escape is because I still feel that it matters to have maps or models to help us understand the world and our place within it, to enable discussion and future right action. The fact I have spent more time in my life reading and thinking in order to be able to produce ideas like this essay shows how, in my life, I have privileged seeking surety through concept and language over other ways of knowing and being in the world. I have succumbed to that ideology despite increasingly knowing that offering models such as escape will not help many people to understand or change. Rather, it is my experiences of loss, pain, and non-ordinary states of consciousness that have helped me to know that there are different ways of interpreting experience than the dominant escape ideology. If I was to suggest to myself or other people that the most important response to our predicament is to become clear in words and concept about what's wrong in our shared cultural experience, then I would be succumbing to this misplaced interest in surety. Instead, I must offer the framework in this essay merely as one limited and fallible tool. I mentioned in the introduction that I am not discussing relevant scholarship or providing references in this essay due to how that would detour from the presentation of the framework. Before progressing beyond the ideological element of surety, I will provide an illustration of how much complexity and nuance would be needed to interface even just some of the relevant scholarship. The French existentialist philosophers were quite clear on the difficulty of being confident on any particular framework for understanding the world or finding meaning. For me, Simone de Beauvoir was the best in showing how our ethical frameworks will always be ambiguous, and therefore, when they are not questioned, then terrible violence can occur. Like the other existentialists, she settled on personal freedoms as being a foundation for meaning. In doing that, they were settling on a form of surety which fitted with their own proclivities at the time. Theodor Adorno and the German critical theorists were good at pointing out how our concepts of socially constructed in ways that reflect and reproduce power relations in society. They also showed how the Enlightenment and subsequent emphasis on scientific rationality meant that existential angst grew to a point where humanity increased its violent destruction of others and the world. However, their critique was of the Enlightenment, and then mainly of bureaucracy and capitalism rather than human attachment to surety. More recently, the philosopher Charles Eisenstein has offered a similar critique that we have been living in an age of separation. He does not critique surety in general, as he suggests that our stories of reality are realities themselves. Before him, the philosopher Richard Rorty was more circumspect about the ability of human thought to describe or reveal realities. Therefore, he invited people to invite a variety of ideas, as well as ways of dialogue that welcome complexity and paradox. My perspective is that Siddhartha Gautama, otherwise known as the Buddha, goes much farther than all of these schools of thought in connecting our sense of being a separate entity with our aversion or impermanence and death as the reason why we are attracted to ideas, information, and people that seem to offer a sense of stability, i.e., surety. Control in escape ideology. The dominant modern culture around the world, not just the West, accepts the ideas that it is possible for the human, both individually and collectively, to control the environment and others, and that it is good to do so. It may appear to us that it is possible that we have benefit from controlling others and nature, but that is only ever a momentary situation. As the self-reinforcing feedbacks further heat our planet, we should come to realize that although our actions influence nature, we are not in control of nature and never were. It is because of this assumption of control that humanity has not paid sufficient attention to the complex environmental home which we are interdependent with. The assumption of control arises from a lack of attention to how our subjective experience of the world and other people is just that, our own experience. It does not dictate what the outside world actually is. It is normal for us each to label what we experience, from apple to cloud to person. However, when we forget that label is arbitrary and provisional, the complex world becomes a mere array of objects on our own subjective stage, which we then seek to control for our own purposes. Therefore, we make assumptions that a person is less worthy of attention and power than others by virtue of the label we have applied to them in our minds. For instance, people become trash, the hordes, the anarchists, the fascists, the mob, or even just the staff, the confused, or the enemy, rather than people like you and me. This othering and alienation between ourselves or the group we identify with is dehumanizing and allows us to ignore the plight of others or perpetuate abuses. They become people to be controlled, either actively or through exclusion. This othering process is also reflexive, as we receive from culture ideas about how we should feel, think, and behave. Therefore, there are aspects of our inner worlds which we are invited to see as less acceptable or likable, especially in certain contexts and for certain types of people. Therefore, on behalf of dominant culture, we seek to control our own emotions and present an appropriate version of ourselves to the world. This process is deeply problematic for the individual and those who they relate to. However, on a collective level, it can be suicidal for a culture as we don't allow the wisdom of our emotions to become part of our collective sense making about what our situation is and what matters. For centuries, people have been suppressing their emotional pain about the way we live and the state of the world as they told each other that suppression was the responsible thing to do. I did it myself, and for years covered my emotional pain with faux positivity and confidence. That was because for so much of my life I was concerned about my own security. Even though I was telling myself I was much more interested in social justice and environmental protection than in my status, finances, or personal life. I was compromising all the time to be able to work for organizations like the WWF, the UN, the Labor Party, and corporations. I was trying to control my situation financially. When I began assessing the latest climate science from the end of 2017, my mortality became more real for me. I realized that what really mattered was that I wanted to live my truth and be more present with people without hiding my weaknesses, insecurities, and doubts. That's why I wrote and released the Deep Adaptation paper as a PDF from my institute rather than rewrite it to be acceptable for the academic journal and have another publication to make my career safer. Oddly, that recklessness led to the biggest impact that I've had in my life. Since then, I still succumb to the desire for control. Part of the motivation for writing this essay is because I've become concerned that people who engage with deep adaptation might develop projects that are contrary to my own perspective of why we are in this mess. I still have to catch myself to make sure I am simply informing rather than seeking to impose. I must be careful not to categorize myself as the one who knows and other people as needing to know. The categories that we apply to ourselves and others do not appear from nowhere, but are given to us by our culture, arising from and maintaining specific power relations. This fact reminds us that we might not be so in control of ourselves, which deserves some more elaboration, which I will attempt next. All right, guys, I think I'm going to read this part and give me 1 second. Let's see. Actually, I want to go down and read this part about exceptionalism. If that's all right with you, I'm going to read this part and wrap up this video afterwards. I'm skipping some things, but again, you guys can read this on your own, as this is an extremely, incredibly long read, but very good. Exceptionalism and escape ideology. I'm concerned about two kinds of exceptionalism. Firstly, that we and our kin are different and better, or at least more entitled than others and their kin. Secondly, that humans are an exceptional species in natural history. Getting into some good stuff right here. It appears quite normal throughout history for people to think, without thinking, that their lives and those of their family, their community, country, race, or religion are more important than the lives of others. This is just natural. This happens all the time. To all people, by the way. These assumptions have led to conflict in the past and do so today. Yet another aspect of it is that people more easily accept their participation in systems of oppression and don't feel complicit in those systems or the terrible suffering that they create. On a planet that is one indivisible whole, this sense of exceptionalism and the denial of the importance of others supports sustained degradation and destruction. It is one way that colonialism of the past is related to the destruction of the present. Another way this exceptionalism manifests is when people think that because they are different, they can escape the destiny of most of the people as humanity faces a climate catastrophe. When people think about building bunkers, moving to New Zealand, growing vegetables off-grid, and such like, they may be pretending to themselves that they can escape a situation that will ruin the lives of billions of other people. Those who think themselves different will be less awake to the possibilities for shared action in solidarity with ordinary, quote-unquote, humans. This is a really key point, a very good point indeed. I'm gonna get away from all these dumb people that don't understand, right? But maybe the only way out is to try and enlighten everyone so that we can all collectively do something about this. This argument does not mean that there is never a place for considering there to be an exceptional circumstance for oneself or one's group. However, being exceptional or making an exception is contingent on context, provisional and not necessarily legitimate. Therefore, such views should be open to constant question from many stakeholders. For instance, if a few were special enough to be saved, who should decide who they were? Or if a few think they know what is the best for the rest of us, what power should we have to disagree? In the realm of social and organizational change, we see a lot of exceptionalism. It is the origin of baseless myths of the importance of the special leader, the need for heroes, the validity of the moral judge, the character of rich business persons, or the savior role of a younger generation and such like. The problem is that it means we look in the wrong directions for how to create social change. Clearly, the possibility for narcissistic attitudes and behaviors exists in everyone, but the problem with escape ideology is that it has been encouraged by a culture through praise and resources. The grandest exceptionalism is our story of humanity being separate and completely different from the natural world. This is enshrined in some religions, but also in secular cultures. Even in some New Age spiritualities, there can be an emphasis on humans being the apogee of consciousness on the planet and perhaps the universe. Assuming this to be true rather than an interesting story means, in some cases, that people are more able to disregard, desecrate, and destroy other life forms in the natural world. The sense of exceptionalism in most of us arises due to our beliefs in autonomy, entitlement, and control, which I discussed earlier. It may also arise in some people to distract themselves from an inner angst that deep down they know their stories of surety are false. When people act from a belief in being exceptional, they may actually harbor a deep panic about the robustness of their worldview and personal identity. A few years ago, I came to realize my own exceptionalism, where I had needed to think I was special in some way to compensate for my insecurities and the absences in my life. I was living a hero story, working hard on activities which were not fun, but that I thought would mean I had an impact on social and environmental outcomes. I was spending my life in front of text on a screen, injuring my body as a result. Those sacrifices in my past may lead me to further justify the same kind of striving in what I do now. For instance, who do I think I am offering an encompassing view in this essay? I reflected on this question and wondered whether a sense of exceptionalism might, conversely, have been holding me back from sharing my views on the causes of our predicament. I had wanted to avoid causing disagreements within the emerging movement on deep adaptation, which is founded on an assumption that I might be seen as special. I realized that people in the deep adaptation field could read my views, think them mumbo jumbo, and move on. What is important is that we all have an ability to self-express, so I invite you to think about how you, in your heart, would answer the question, why did humanity destroy so much life on Earth? I suggest you answer this question to yourself, not others, and express yourself in your own way. Words, poems, painting, dances, prayers, songs, arguments. Not because you are exceptional, but because this is a question that every person on the planet should be asking soon. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed that little foray into the essay by Jem Bendell. I wish I could read the whole thing. I just don't think that there's a way to do. I mean, I'd probably be reading like 2 whole hour-long video presentations, the whole thing, and I'm not really into that kind of thing anymore. I used to do that maybe last year, but I just think some of the issues he brought up were pretty spot on, right? Especially the part about exceptionalism, where we humans, some people within humanity view them as exceptional, view themselves as exceptional to others in humanity, and humanity as a whole views themselves as exceptional to the rest of the planet or to the entire world. They, see themselves as being, rightly in a place of control or rightly dominant or domineering over nature, right? We see that this is a basic problem of humanity on Earth, and a basic reason why we have destroyed so much of the Earth and can't live in harmony with our own biosphere, with the thing that nurtures us, with the thing that keeps us alive. Hey guys, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. You can also support the channel at the links below: PayPal, Square, and Patreon. Also, all of my live streams are available for listening on Patreon if you happen to miss them during the day. So you can sign up for my Patreon for as little as $1. If you want to go check out the live streams, they are all there. Thanks a lot.